Hello, Frizzlefish. We're here to discuss this Spider-Man novel, The Darkest Hours, and how did I come across this lovely novel? This isn't actually the first Spider-Man novel I've read, but it's definitely the best. But I didn't find it because of Spider-Man, I found it because of the author, Mr. Jim Butcher. Jim Butcher is the author of The Dresden Files, one of my favorite series. And I'm doing this project where I'm trying to find books that are similar to Dresden Files, so of course I have to go read the Jim Butcher Spider-Man book. And guys, it's definitely an above-average Spider-Man book. But as I was reading this book, they kept mentioning this face-off that happened between Spider-Man and Morlun in a previous book, and I was like, I need more context here. So I went to Googling and I started reading Morlun's Wikipedia page, and then I realized I just have to go read the comics that this novel keeps blabbering on about. This book really does act as a sequel to a specific run of 5 Spider-Man comics. This is Spider-Man Volume 2, numbers 30 through 35. So when I was about a fourth of the way into the novel, I went and I picked up the comic book and I read that instead. And the comic book was certainly less good than the novel, but also pretty okay. Like, it was an average Spider-Man story, you know? So if you're into that, I would recommend reading the comics first, but if you're not super into comics, you don't have to read it first, you can just read the novel. But let's pick apart a little bit things that I liked and didn't like about the comic book. You know, now that I start thinking about things, it's pretty much all didn't like. Here's the thing that was interesting in the comic, and could have been done better. Peter Parker's backstory, he's bitten by a radioactive spider, gets spider powers, etc. But then, in this run of comics, someone tells Peter Parker, like, maybe the spider that bit you was actually kind of a magic spider that was just coincidentally dying of radiation at the time. And okay. But Spider-Man has always been like the science-y kind of superhero. There are the magic-y superheroes and the science-y superheroes. And Spider-Man is definitely one of the more science-y superheroes. So this was kind of an interesting shift in the comics. And Spider-Man himself also identifies as one of the science-y superheroes, so he doesn't want to accept that it was a magic spider, of course. And in the end, he defeats the villain by embracing his science side. But also, it is kind of a magic spider in the end, and future stories also elaborate on that. So the novel by Jim Butcher also kind of flirts with these ideas, but it pretty much only goes as far as Spidey complaining about how he doesn't like magic and how it's confusing. Because in both of the stories, Spider-Man is battling very magic-oriented people. But it's Morlun and his various siblings, and what they do is they feed on animal energy in people, etc. They're called like totems. You don't need to know all those details. But they want to eat Spider-Man's spider magic. This is one of Spider-Man's hardest physical fights because Morlun is kind of like unstoppable, and then Spider-Man is just getting beaten to a pulp repeatedly. And Morlun can track him wherever they go, and whenever Spider-Man tries to retreat, Morlun starts beating up random civilians and killing them until Spider-Man comes back to save the day. Which is quite a villainy thing to do. Honestly, the average villain in comic books isn't evil enough to just randomly murder innocent civilians just to get the hero's attention. Like, to complete their plan, sure. But if all the villains would stoop to that level that quickly, the heroes would have a lot harder time. But the point is, that I'm trying to make, and I'm circling around, is that the main drama in this comic book is from the question, will Spidey actually die this time? Because he's looking kind of close to it a lot of time, and for most of the book, he has no idea how to defeat this guy. But is that drama ever really going to work in a comic book? I mean, you can't kill off Spider-Man, at least not in any kind of permanent sense. So the stakes feel fake the whole time. The key to a good comic is that the stakes aren't just tied to the hero's continuing existence, but to the hero's feelings, to the friends, to things that can actually be lost. So now let's switch gears and talk about the novel. From little things to big things, I think the novel far surpasses the comic, for which it is a sequel. For example, there's this little detail that's in the comics and the book, which I find fascinating. And that is, when Spider-Man is around these goons, these groups of ancient people, his spider sense goes haywire, crazy, alarm bells all the time. And because of that, he can't really use it to like fight effectively, and it really throws him off his edge because he's like constantly in spider sense overdrive. And in the comic, this happens for like 3 panels when he's kind of disoriented because this is happening, and then it doesn't really play a part in the story from then on. But in contrast, in the novel, you can really feel how hard this is affecting Spidey, because it's not only throwing him off his fighting game because he can no longer rely on his fighting sense, it's also throwing him off his emotional game because he's in this constant state of high stress and terror, and he is shaking and afraid and snapping at people and not really being able to get into his fighting banter groove all the time. And where in the comic the main theme is like magic versus science, the book, the main theme is learning how to accept help, which is interesting because also in the comic, like, shouldn't you be calling in the Avengers a little harder right now? He tries a little, but then it's like, oh, they're out of town. Guess I'll just have to defeat this super strong, invulnerable guy by myself. But in the book, Spider-Man also doesn't want to call in a lot of help because he's got this complex. He doesn't want to get other people hurt. He figures this is my problem, especially because the siblings in the book are coming after him because he killed their brother in the comic. Kind of. This learning how to accept help, to work together with people, wonderfully intertwines with like all of the other sources of tension and drama in the book. His relationship with his wife, Mary Jane, his relationship with Black Cat, his ex, his relationship with the high schoolers that he's teaching and trying to coach on the basketball team. Peter Parker learns how to accept help, and he teaches the kids on the basketball team how to work together too. But the main thing that really struck me as the ultimate strength of the novel, and kind of the worst moment of the comic, is the moment of the darkest hour. See what I did there? That's the name of the book. Because there's a moment in both of these stories where Spider-Man kind of says, I'm not making it out of this fight alive, probably. This is like one of the strongest people I've ever fought against, and pretty much nothing I've done has worked. Hey guys, so it's the next day, funny story. I invited my friend to come over, and then I forgot that she was coming over, started recording a video, and then she came in the middle of it. So here we go, let's continue talking. So in the comic book, when Peter Parker knows that he's probably going to die, he calls Aunt May. And the conversation is kind of like, hey, how are you doing? I'm doing good. Hey, how are you doing? I'm doing good. Okay, sorry, I have to go now. And then he goes to fight because he doesn't give up. And this was one of the flattest points of the comic for me, because this is a moment that could be so charged with emotion. He's saying goodbye to his aunt. He's trying to get one last little bit of strength, and then it's just kind of flat. But then in the novel, when he's at the same point and calls Aunt May, there is such a beautiful discussion where she gives him a pep talk about how he needs to keep going and he is a symbol of hope and he can still do it and he can defeat the evil guy. And this conversation has a profound impact on Peter, because until that point, he was just kind of planning to keep fighting the villains until he died. But this conversation gives him enough hope to start really searching for a real solution and not giving up. And this is why I think that this novel is one of the best Spider-Man stories I've ever consumed. Probably the best actually would be the Superior Spider-Man comics, but this one is like second, because it does have a lot of Spidey charm and all the wisecracks and web slinging that you could want, but it also has a really nice emotional backbone. And I would like to say another point that kind of bothered me when I was reading through the Goodreads reviews of this novel, which is, of course, most people found this novel because they liked Dresden Files. And then a lot of the reviews were saying things like, Spider-Man just feels like Dresden. Their personalities are so similar. And well, this is undeniably true, and this is probably the reason why Jim Butcher got a Spider-Man novel in the first place. I would like to say that Spider-Man's characterization is spot on for this era in Spider-Man comics. Spider-Man is making the same kind of jokes, the same kind of narration. The voice in the novel reminded me so strongly of the voice in the comics. Way stronger than Harry Dresden's voice. So no, this is not a novel of Harry Dresden, but if he was Spider-Man. This is a novel lovingly crafted by an obvious Spider-Man comics fan that characterizes him so on point, which coincidentally is really similar to the personality of Harry Dresden, but not exactly the same. And I design shirts, like this one. It was kind of modeled off of my background here, if you hadn't noticed. But also many other designs from different books and fandoms and just stuff for bookworms in general. So go check out my store if you're interested in that. And if you liked this video, give it a like, and if you want to see more of these, subscribe for more Frizzle Fridays. If you made it to the end of the video, comment a spider emoji. Thanks for watching!